Welcome to the Catalyst Sale podcast. We are going to continue the series of onboarding Tanner. This is just a continuation of the conversation where we talk about onboarding someone who's never been in a sales role previously and experience in being onboarded into a sales role and going out and contacting people through traditional cold outreach, looking at different models. Tanner, thanks for joining me on the podcast again. I think this is the fourth one we've done, third or fourth one of these that we've done.
Third or fourth, yeah. And I think we're almost to the point where I've been on your show now more than you've been on mine, so we're almost even.
Sounds like we're gonna have to fix that then.
I guess so. I don't know on which end, but we'll fix it.
So, all right. So we've wrapped things up, and this was a 3-month test, and we knew that coming out of the gate. We said, hey, we're going to test this for 3 months, see what we're able to do. On a positive note, 3 months, you've sold 2 iterations of the course. On another learning side of things, you sold 2 iterations of the course that we weren't really planning on selling of the course, but that's what we sold. So you adapt and you adjust and you iterate based on feedback from the market. The original plan was to focus on B2B sales of the course, selling the up to 5 version of the course of Demystify Sales, which includes some coaching, and that the price point on that is $5K. And ultimately, what you were able to sell were 2 of the $1,500 options, which is the course for one person, and include 2 25-minute coaching sessions. So let's just start with, of all of the things we did, what are some of the things you absolutely never want to do again?
It's funny because you text me that in preparation for the episode, and I had to really think about things that I absolutely never want to do again. And man, I mean, this has been a really good learning experience and a really challenging experience. When I look at never do again, I would probably say assume that you know what the next right step is always, right? Having the ability to swallow pride and just ask a question, I think I'd rather lean in that way moving forward than having this idea of I have everything in front of me. I know what I could do. Ask the ability to ask more questions. And I think that's for a lot of facets of life. We just think we can assume and move forward with stuff, but I never again will I ignore the opportunity to ask a question. Whether
Sounds like
it's
you were working with poor leadership for you to feel like you did not have the ability to ask questions. So, how can I get better as a leader?
I wouldn't frame it that way. I'd frame it in a couple ways. A couple ways of one thing that Mike does really, really well is he provides a lot of content through the podcast, through the course, through his blog post. And not a lot of people provide that much information. And I think for me it was a matter of I overcomplicated the simple things, which I shouldn't have done. And then I think also, when we did communicate, I think there was times at the beginning we kept our conversations, they were very about the frameworks or the methods, and it wasn't so much the granular conversations of what happened this week or who did we reach out to. The first little bit of the conversations were very much about the frameworks and stuff, and I don't know where that stemmed from on my end, if it was me still trying to get familiar or whatever it may have been, but I think it's a both person uh, contribution to that. Um, Never again, I guess.
Yeah. So I think it's really important to reinforce that sales it is a team sport, and
Yeah.
one of the reasons we did this experiment, and this was a valuable experiment. One of the reasons we did the experiment was to learn, and one of the ways that we learn is through communicating with each other, and another way that we learn is through asking questions, and it helps provoke additional thought and creates opportunities for us to test things. So when we talk about sales being a team sport, one of the first things that happened, you had a sales call, and we won't get into specific names of people, but a sales call with an organization, and you decide you wanted to go it alone. And I knew that I mean I was prepared to help you with it if you asked, but I also was okay with the idea of you saying, "Hey, I'm going to go it alone," because I wanted to see the learning happen.
Yeah.
Then we had a follow-up conversation with that same person, and something was a bit different. How would you describe the difference between those two conversations, the initial conversation you had and then the conversation where I participated?
Yeah, so the conversation I had with them, it almost felt like a bullet point conversation. There wasn't a ton of enthusiasm on their end. It ended in, "Hey, just send me an email of everything you guys are offering, and I'll think it over from there." And then the conversation we ended up having with you on the call, um, it was more conversational. There was more engagement. There was definitely a feel of you held an authority figure role, and yeah, that was a big learning curve for me and learning experience because compared to my call to your call, I was just like, for me, it was almost like I'm sitting there with the checklist in my head of, okay, I'm gonna ask this question, like I get this question. Oh, look at that question's leading this place. Whereas when I watched you on the call, it didn't ever feel like there was this plan, but it was all coming together. And so I think, it also gave me an appreciation for people that are in sales that are effective because it's not always an easy thing. So that gave me an appreciation and it was a good spoonful of humility too.
Well, so there's always a plan. Like there just always is a plan. We know where
Yeah.
we're going to go, and there's always some design that we're applying with it. And we talk about call planning, and it's understanding who the person is on the call, who are the people that are on the call, what are their objectives, what are our objectives. On our side, we should know our objectives. On their side, we're anticipating their objectives, and we should have a set of desired next steps. Like what is it
Yeah.
we want to get to, and then we design backward based on that. And we organize questions and kind of guide and try to pay attention to time. And we were a little bit rushed for time. So I did a little bit more talking than I would normally do. I would have asked a couple of more questions. Had that been a first call, I would have started with more questions rather than validating some of the things that we knew based on what the person had shared. The thing that I want everybody to kind of take away from this, and again, good learning experience, and this happens whenever you're onboarding a new sales rep, when you're coaching members of your team, when you're building capability inside your organization. Anytime that you can have two sets of ears on a call, the likelihood of success starts to increase, especially if everybody knows what their role is. And when you have those conversations, there are things that Tanner will hear on that call that I wouldn't hear. There are things that I will ask on that call that Tanner wouldn't know to ask. As you build teams inside your organization, leverage the experience and don't let your sales reps fail alone. And as a sales rep, don't ever fail alone. Ask for people to be a part of it. Now, if you're 3 years into a role and you've been selling into the same market and then you're asking people to join you on those initial calls, then you're probably wasting people's time. But in an instance where you're new to the sales profession and you're trying to kind of figure things out, it's one thing to read in a book or see it in a bunch of videos or hear a bunch of podcasts that say this is what you should do. But then it's completely different when you actually get in the operating environment and you're forced to start to ask some questions and try to figure out how do I make that question sound conversational? Because I don't think at any point in the time, and granted, I built the content, so my level of expertise relative to the content is a little bit different than Tanner's. So, and there we go. I'll see if I can remove the name. I didn't go complete, but the person who was on the other end, who was listening to this, or who was going through this, his he there was definitely some higher level of authority that was applied to me knowing and doing this work, which is different than Tanner's, which is going to happen. This is where you can really leverage the collective intelligence, wisdom, and experience of your team to learn as you go, and yeah, just learn as you go. So that's one thing. Hindsight being 2020, although I think there was valuable value in failing in that first call or having that first call go the way that it went, whether it was a failure or not, and then
Yeah.
seeing the second call go the way that it went, because then you could start to cross reference the two and say,
Yeah.
oh, there was something different here. And the thing that was different was ideally I was a little bit more relaxed in the way the conversation was going and moving things along than you might have been when you were going through and saying, okay, I got to make sure I hit on all of these points. It's like riding a bike for the first time. Riding a
Yeah.
bike for the first time, you're thinking about, okay, where do I put my hands and how do I pedal and what's in front of me and where are things at? Where if you ride a bike for a couple of years, you start to get into the flow.
Yeah.
So what about Anything else on the, hey, I want to, I would, or anything on the, I would do this differently if we were starting, knowing what I know now, this is what I would do differently. This is something I would do different when it comes to this kind of an experiment.
Man, that's those kind of questions are always those are difficult questions because you have all that experience afterwards. I think number one, it would be play loose from the beginning. And that's something me and you have discussed. Man, I can't tell you how many times. The first time we met, that was like our primary discussion is playing loose and trusting the playbook, but also being adaptable and being flexible. So I think that'd be a hindsight 2020. It would just be play loose, really focus on the people. Don't get lost in the numbers of everything. I think a lot of times when you get lost in the numbers and then the numbers don't turn over into something, you start to feel like, oh, I'm not good at this. But if you're able to really focus on the people, I think that's where you get more conversations. So I think that'd be another thing. If I look back, I would really try harder from the beginning to be a lot more conversational. Um, uh, you know, and I think ultimately, again, going back to the point of being leaning on you way, way more than I did. And I don't know what causes hesitation, and I think we see it for a lot of people through a lot of different careers. They're afraid to lean on their leaders, um, and it's hard sometimes for the leader to know that someone needs someone to lean on. So those probably would have been the three adjustments: is play loose, be more conversational, and lean on you far more than I did.
So as a leader, it's important to ask more questions. And sometimes my jokes can go a little bit too far. Like I drew a Franklin T up on the board, and Tanner was asking, "How do I know if I'm successful?" And I had a little stick figure on the loss side of the Franklin T, and then I said, "When we move over to the profit side, then you're successful." So sometimes that humor, as much as I think it's funny, it may not land well. And a lot of that depends on the rapport that you've got with the people that you're working with. And you've got to really remember, hey, they're deeply committed to this thing. And, even though the jokes might sound funny and it's a way to try to lighten things up, it might actually increase stress in certain circumstances and then reduce the level of communication that's happening. So I think just another thing to be aware of from a leadership perspective. How are you leading your team? What questions are you asking? How are you engaging with others?
Yeah, and that's huge too. Like from my experience doing leadership and development coaching, and culture coordinating, that was one of the biggest things I saw with leaders is, and this is not saying this is something you did. This is speaking generally on leaders is, and I want to make sure that's said is a lot of times leaders can assume how everyone is doing just from a simple 5-minute conversation. But I mean, I look at leadership in the margins of, okay, if you have 100% of time and you take only 5% of time to talk to someone, there's 95% of time you've missed of things that they've experienced. And how are you going to dig into the 95%? Is it, through surveying? Is it through one-on-one? What are you doing to dig into the 95? So from a leadership note, make sure you as leaders are digging into that 95. Find unique ways, whether it's a buddy system. I work for a company where you were assigned a buddy and you had to report on each other. There were certain stipulations to not go into HR problems, but if your buddy was struggling something, you reported it in, not to get them in trouble, but so that the needed resources could be brought to that person to help them. So there's that note for me.
Well, so and one of the reasons we did this test is we wanted to test one, could it take somebody, even though Tanner and I worked with each other, for a number of months, just in different, coaching conversations or general discussions. And I knew he'd already gone through the content. Could it take someone who had not sold something previously, didn't have this in their on their resume, and and get them to perform quickly and or accelerate the speed up the time to impact. And what I wanted to test was, is the course the right course? Does it have the right information? Are there things that we need to continue to revisit periodically because points just didn't land very well? And there were a number of times, where Tanner would ask a question, Tanner, you'd ask a question, and I'd point you back to a specific section of the course, or I'd point you to a specific podcast. So I knew that the content had already been created to address these challenges. It was a question of how accessible that content was or is.
Yeah.
And that feedback is going to help in the next version of Demystify Sales. And there are a number of things that we'll do differently, or I'll do differently, related to the next version of Demystify Sales. And anybody who has access to the course will have access to the updated version. They'll see the updated version in addition to the current one. But there are, a couple of ways where uh, I think we could be more clear both in the way that the content is navigated, but also the way that it's structured to make it easier to use. And there were some things we added. We added in some fill in options inside the PDF, which is really good. It's a feedback that we'd received before, but once we started hearing it a little bit more inside the market, it made sense to invest and get that taken care of. An investment is either time or money or any other kind of resource, but we took care of some of those things. So there were a lot of really good lessons learned in this test that will apply. One of the other ones that I thought was really interesting is the this piece around the difference between price, so the what something costs, and the ability to pay for it when someone can actually deliver it from a budget perspective. And when I think of these numbers, I think we priced the course relatively low, or at a number where I would feel comfortable making certain investments. And I know that's not for everybody, but I also didn't want to get into a situation where people were paying for something and then not using it. So the price points are high, not extremely high, and you will see how those get adjusted. But it was interesting. We had two instances where folks were not ready to make a decision, or they made a decision. They said, "Yep, I see the value in it," but they didn't want to move forward because they couldn't afford it right now. It just didn't align with their timing. So what do we do?
It was Mike's idea. Mike and I
We're a
were,
team. Team.
it's a team, but it was Mike's idea. Um, we were having a conversation about it, and one of the individuals, I kept saying, look, if once he gets into the course, he'll just be a really awesome cheerleader. He's in on stuff. I've done stuff with him before, and Mike threw out the idea of, what if we, let them pay later? What if I worked out a better date for them? And I said, let me reach out to this individual first that I knew really well, and I think that'll be a good indicator if we should reach out to someone else and give him a call. And I say, hey, we get into a little bit of conversation. I'm like, if you could pay later, and before I could finish his statement, he just said yes automatically. And I was like, that's a huge indicator, right? That was big. So I messaged you right away and I said, hey, he's in. And here's the course and the amount he's going to go for. And then that was my indicator of, okay, let's reach out to the other individual you were talking about, where I had the original call with them, got them on. And then I reached out to them again, and it was just, hey, here's this idea. What do you think? And the response was, that's a great idea. How do we get going? And, set them up with you to have a call and move forward. So, you know, and it could be the circumstances we're all going through right now in 2020 that led to that, but it was a really valuable test, and it's something that opens up a lot of doors of, is it a pay as you go? I've seen some training where it's, if you want the next part of the training, it's going to cost you X amount, otherwise you have access to all the other stuff. But it gives Mike an option to begin to look at, is there a restructure here? Is there because obviously the value is there. I think that was the biggest thing I learned from this price versus budget thing, right? When you see the value, the price is justified. The budget could be just, can I actually pay for it? When someone says, I can't afford it, you have to really understand, is it price and not seeing the value, or is it budget because you can't do it right now? Actually, that was a huge aha for me.
Yeah, and it's just where you kind of go through and you say, what's your flexibility? Like, what are some of the models that we can use? And this is not a new or unique idea. Meaning, I've seen it done before. I've been involved in instances where we've done this before in enterprise software deployments, where we do based on a commitment now, we'll invoice at a later date, or we'll set different payment terms up. We're dealing with a much smaller version of this, but the original source of this is Popeye, and it's Wimpy. I'd gladly pay you Tuesday for a hamburger today. So if and Tanner's looking at me like he's never seen Popeye before or has no recollection of the cartoon. There is a cartoon called Popeye. I think at one point it was a comic beforehand, but cartoon called Popeye. There's a dude named Wimpy. He likes hamburgers, and he doesn't always have money on him. So he will gladly pay you Tuesday for a hamburger today. And it's the same concept where you start to say, what kind of flexibility can I provide so that I'm trading a certain thing? I'm trading time ability to access, delaying the injection of revenue, the compensation. And I get it. Not everybody can do this, but when you're out in the market and you're testing, and I know this sounds like a one giant pitch for catalyst sale stuff. This is the testing process we go through. You go through a testing process as you deliver products in the market, as you bring on new people, as you increase scale among your team. And a learning piece that we wouldn't have had before, had Tanner not gone through this, is the value is there, but what we're running into is there's a timing in this instance. There's a timing component. Now, in both of those instances, I think we had to overcome other things before we even got to the timing component. Meaning, at first, some of the objections are, hey, why should I pay you for this when everybody else gives it for free? Or some people charge significantly less for these things. Response: we give away a lot of this in the Catalyst Sale podcast. It's free. I've never charged anybody for the podcast. Thinking about doing some different things there, but this version of the Catalyst Sale podcast is free. There are tools that we make available on the website. Now, we've tried, in the spirit of trying to make it easy to work with us, and Tanner was in the room where all of this kind of came up. We worked together in a mastermind earlier this year, and it's late 2020 now, but earlier this year we were in a mastermind. We were talking about making it easy for organizations to do business with you. And as an outcome of that, I worked to provide clarity in the business. We came up with a diagram that said free, which is the podcast, um, self-directed but paid, which are the courses, and tailored, which is working with me directly, and that gets a bit more expensive. So that anybody who's interested in doing this and applying these ideas can do so, because our mission as an organization is to help people get better at sales. If they're interested in getting better at sales, if you're interested in trying to figure out a way to trick people, then that's not what we're here for, and that's not what sales is. So Tanner, really good experiment, a lot of lessons learned around things that we wouldn't want to do or things that we would do a little bit differently. When you just think about like your key takeaways and just the biggest, other than the chance to work with me directly on this stuff over a period of time and do that, what what are the things you took away from the experience that you'll be able to apply to the other ventures that you're working on?
Um, Man, it's gonna be kind of hard not to get emotional talking about this because I look back on really this path working with Mike. It really started a couple years ago when I found Creating Disney Magic and made a reach out to Lee Cockrell, and he basically tore me a new one and told me that I had to improve and I had to change, and that led to getting to know Jody, and then that led to the mastermind event and meeting Jeff Knoll and Dan Cockrell, and it's a few years of all these individuals, and then Mike, and each of them have given me skills and abilities and confidence in different areas that have changed the trajectory of where I'm headed. And with Mike's stuff, um, Mike has taught me how to ask the critical questions. He's taught me how to be analytical, but also have extreme empathy as you're doing it. There's still some details being worked out, but because of, and I do credit his work on this. When I first launched my podcast, I went back and looked at the numbers. The first month I had 12 downloads total, and then the last month there was 1,000 downloads, and that led to getting to launch a second podcast with Chip Huth. And there's a lot of other stuff now happening in the background with him that is going to turn into some really cool things. And one of the frameworks, well, most of the frameworks we're leaning on is Mike's frameworks as we're building our podcast and a couple other things that we want to be doing. And I just have complete gratitude, and um, I just consider Mike, number one, an extremely good friend and mentor, but someone that was willing to give me a chance to come in and learn this, because I find myself very often when I'm meeting with Chip using language that Mike would use. Today I had a phone call with someone and they're trying to figure out how to become a niche on LinkedIn. They really want to get their message down. And I said, well, what's your message? Who cares? Why does it matter? Why is it important? Why hasn't anyone else fixed this yet? And we hung up, and I just sat there. I'm like, that was just Mike Simmons, right? And so again, that's why it's hard for me not to get emotional because the impact that Mike's had on my life, even though this experiment probably didn't pan out the way we may have wanted, the impact he's had on me, it's immeasurable and incalculable, and so I'm grateful that I've learned how to sell to people and not objects, learn tools that have been applicable both in a sales position and outside of it, from territory planning, account planning, you know, call planning, all these different tools I've used, not just in the sales role, but in a podcast, as a father, as a husband, as an employee, as someone that wants to grow. When it comes to goal setting, Mike's goal setting method, that's the goal setting method that I use, breaking things down, understanding them, the 30, 60, 90 day plan. And so for me, the biggest takeaway has just been the opportunity to be humble enough to learn from master teachers and then apply what they're teaching because they're true principles. Not sure if that really hit the question on the head, but that's what's been on my mind as of late.
With all of that, how could I say it didn't hit the question on the head? But like, so one of the things I want to add to that, and Tanner, thank you. I mean, this worked out. This was a good experiment. There were a lot of things that were learned. We don't worry about the outcome, like the financial outcome. Investment is just that. Some investments pay off,
Yeah,
and are 10x, and some investments are pay off in the lessons and the things you learn. So this was a very good experience, good investment, good opportunity to learn for both of us and for all of us,
yeah,
and we'll be in a better position as we go forward. I think the thing that I hope folks heard, just as Tanner was kind of describing it, is this is someone who's not traditionally sold anything. And I know a lot of times, because of the name of the podcast and the name of the company, that people will say these are things that only apply to sales. There's a reason why we called the course Demystify Sales, Sales for Non-Sales Professionals. It's about how common practices that people who do really well in sales apply, things that they apply, and how they can apply to helping you be a better problem solver at home, at work, in your community, in your neighborhood, and make an impact on others. Because if we understand the problem that someone has, and we've got a sense for the solutions that exist out in the marketplace, we as sales professionals, we as people who help people solve problems, can help accelerate the path between problem and solution. And it doesn't matter if you're in sales or you're not in sales, or if you never want to sell a thing, if you're interested in solving problems, if you're interested in executing on goals, if you're interested in making a difference, the tools and the frameworks and the approach and the models that are shared will make an impact. And one of the other things I'm thinking about, just as we go through this, is, does it make sense to continue to sell the content? Do we just start selling the frameworks? Do we just start selling the tools as a way to where they can be licensed and applied? And I don't know. So this is all just going to be a constant iteration, just like everything else, as we all move forward. But I think this has been an awesome experiment. A lot of good lessons learned, things you'll be able to apply, Tanner, as you continue to progress,
yeah.
and hopefully as others who've been following this will be able to progress. Tanner, anything else to add?
I think the one thing that I'd finish with, and it's something Mike said from the beginning, is once you get experience, no one can take that from you. And for me, I look at this and, I've went out, got this experience, and no one can take that from me. And that'd be my encouragement. I think if 2020 has taught us anything, is get out there and get experience and get that exposure, as uncomfortable as it may make you, because you don't know where the next thing will lead. And, it's been a big thing for me is I've never known where the next thing will lead, but I'm always willing to, have the phone calls with Mike or Lee, Jeff, Jody, Dan, because it's led to a lot of things that I never would have anticipated. So get out there, get the experience and the exposure, and you know, get bruises and scars on you because that's where the fun happens.
And as much as we talk about sales being a thinking process, action is more important than thinking. So take action, go out there, do the work. Don't overcomplicate this stuff. Like, if you look at any of this stuff, as Tanner was going through the who, what, why, when, and how, and 30, 60, 90. Most of you know that's the account plan. And the account plan is a hexagon. It's a simple shape. The call plan is a square. It's a simple shape. Proposal, square, simple shape. The that template or process or framework in helping to create clarity and deliver focus, which we've included in the logo. Those are some simple lines, and they look like area charts. Again, applying concepts that we know that work in other areas to this to help us move things forward and really uncomplicate things. So, Tanner, thanks. This was awesome. Continue to move forward, simplifying things. Don't overcomplicate things.
Yeah.
And for everyone else, thanks for listening to the Catalyst Sale podcast. If you know of anybody who would benefit from this, please share it. If you are struggling with goal setting and execution, take a look at the game plan, which is the updated. It was originally called the reset, but now that everybody's talking about the global reset, I'm going to go ahead and rebrand the goal setting and execution course, which is really just the game based approach to goal setting and execution. It's about creating clarity and focus, holding yourself accountable. The framework is goals, actions, metrics, and execution. And this will help you get better at goal setting and execution. If you go to catalystsale.com/game plan, you'll see details there.